Hello everybody, today we continue with the Benko Gambit, and in the second lecture I would like to show you more brilliant examples of how to play with the Benko Gambit variation. As you know, when you are studying the opening line, it's not only important to remember the opening moves, but mostly ideas behind the moves. So that's why when we start studying any of the openings, extremely nice, not only remember the strategic ideas and the plans, but also very typical tactical idea in the opening you choose. And in the Benko Gambit, I would like to remind you that after d4, knight f6, c4, c5, d5, black is sacrificing pawn for the obtaining the initiative on the queen side after b7 and b5. And last time we were just looking and studying the main ideas for black, how to play the Benko Gambit, what's the strategic ideas behind this opening, what's black's usual setup in the Benko Gambit, why it's so important to check the bishop to g7, to bring the light square bishop to a6, how important to use the weakness of the light squares on the white's camp. And as I said, sometimes white is trying to avoid the main streams of the Benko Gambit and trying to play some sidelines, but usually all these sidelines are favorite black, and I would like just to show you more examples of why it's so difficult for white to play against the Benko Gambit. After b5, one of the opportunity for white, just what he's saying, I would like to keep my c4 pawn protected and just to play b3. What's the problem with that move? Immediately we can realize that white's rook on a1 and the wall diagonal a1 and g7 becomes just unprotected. So black continued to develop usual way, g6, and after bishop g5 could play immediately knight e4. So because white is not yet ready to protect the center square on e4, so black is just obtaining this strong outpost for its knight. Probably best response for white here is to go with the bishop to d2, because let's say bishop h4 is extremely dangerous already. After queen a5, white's king is not feeling so good. Indeed, white decided to move its bishop back after bishop c1 and after e6 to develop the light square bishop after g3, which immediately met by double attack. Could you find it? I believe it's not so difficult. Look, we are having two targets. The queen comes to f6, at the same time attacking the pawn on f2 with the checkmate ideas, and of course rook on a1 is completely unprotected and even no way for white to escape from this queen f6 double threat. So white immediately resigns, because after f3 and queen takes a1, black is not only capturing the rook, but also knight on b1 is under attack. So let's see another short game. So after b5, c takes b5, a6. So this is the main continuation of in the Benko Gambit. White somehow decided to play knight f3 and after a takes b5, so black already captured back the pawn. e3. Not so often, I would say, in a rare line. So black doesn't like to protect the pawn on b5. Instead, according to the opening principles, we just continue developing. Bishop comes to b7. Bishop takes b5. Queen a5 check. And after knight c3, now we can realize that this is the only way to protect from the check and to take control over the b5 square, so where our bishop is hanging. Black is just simply playing knight takes d5 and almost no solution for white. So black is intending knight takes c3. So white just blundering here a piece in the game after bishop d2, knight takes c3, lost the bishop on b5. So by playing knight takes c3, black is getting rid of the only defender of the bishop e5. And even after best move like queen b3, black is still getting much better position after, let's say, knight takes c3, b takes c3, and the e6 or knight c6. So everywhere black is clearly better. Or even a bishop a6. So black is having center and open file, white is having quite weak pawns on the queen side. One more try for white. In the position after b5 is to play c takes a6 and b takes a6. So today's theory even says that black not forced to capture immediately on pawn on a6. We can play it only after white already continued developing its knight to c3. This knight supports white's idea e2, e4. So as I said before, e4 and e5, one of the most basic ideas from the white side in the Benko Gambit. So black could start immediately with g6. So preparing the fianchetting the bishop on g7 and following the main setup. b3. So white is also trying to put the bishop on b2, but after bishop g7 and bishop b2, white start having problems here with the diagonal a5, e1. Black just simply capturing pawn with the knight, even not with the bishop. After knight c3, knight b4. How to stop knight takes d5. e4 doesn't help so much. Once again, knight takes e4, you see, the bishop on b2 is unprotected. So white decided to play queen d2. And black just brings the queen to a5, and suddenly white cannot save the pawn on d5 anymore. Let's say after knight f3, what black can play now? Knight f to d5. Look at that great move. Knight takes d5, bishop takes b2. Force white to move the queen from d2. So after we decoy the queen to d2, that knight d3 check wins immediately the queen in the game. So weaknesses of the diagonals here, decisive factors. So that's why it's so dangerous for white to develop the bishop to the long diagonal. So black's opponent in this situation much more powerful. One more typical game which happened in that line. d5, b5, c takes b5, a6, Knight f3. So black just simply continue here. d6. Knight c3. g6. g3. Bishop g7. Bishop g2, and finally black captured 8 takes b5, intending to bring the pawn to b4. Knight takes b5, and typical queen a5 check, force white knight to go home after knight c3, and knight e4. So black is just increasing all pieces attacking c3 knight. In case of short castling, knight takes c3, black is just winning 2 pawns. Knight takes c3, b takes c3, and then or bishop takes c3, and queen takes c3, and pawn on a2 is gone very soon. So white decided to use the tactical resources and the position and to play bishop d2, and after knight takes c3, trying to keep the position, trying to keep the extra pawn by queen c2, which is a decisive mistake. Suddenly this move is a decisive mistake. Why? Because black, using the unprotected position of the white's queen on c2 by queen a4, aggressively attacking the queen. So white cannot capture because knight escapes from c3 and black is just with extra piece. So white cannot capture on c3 because the queen on c2 unprotected. White's only chance is to play b3, but once again black is finding the solution. Queen e4, attacking white's queen at the same time. Knight on c3 is still alive, so white is just having piece down after queen takes e4 and knight takes e4, and this forces white to resign already here after queen e4. So the tactics with bishop d2 just doesn't work in such a situation. So be very, very careful. One more game where white was trying to contradict the Benko Gambit with a tricky play. b5, c takes b5, a6, b takes a6, g6, knight c3, and here the best reaction for black, of course, bishop takes a6, but in that game black played first of all d6. I wouldn't recommend it because white is having now the opportunity to push e pawn and then to bring the bishop and knight without losing any tempo. So in that case, white's king is still keep castling, right? Instead, after knight c3, bishop g7, d6, e4, and bishop g7, white, instead of just simply continue developing with knight to f3s and bishop to e2, etc., decided to play queen a4 check, trying to keep the pawn on a6 and destroying black's development. Otherwise black is of course playing short castling. Bishop d7, queen a3, trying to keep the pawn on a6 alive. Does it work? Never. So no need even to calculate. Black always could find here some tactical combination. Knight takes a6, destroying white's idea. Of course, white played bishop takes a6 and queen b6. The rook is capturing the bishop on a6, and white is in very strange position with the queen on b5. Last chance. So white is trying his last trap. Knight b5. Looks great from the first sign. So black cannot recapture on a6 because queen takes a6. Suddenly white is the side who is winning, not black. After queen takes a6, knight c7. So black is losing the queen and the white is just gaining extra rook. Indeed, we are not forced to capture on a6. Also, we cannot capture on b5 because after bishop takes b5, check, intermediate move, black rook on a8 unprotected. Indeed, we are not forced even capture the knight on b5. We just simply completing our development with a brilliant move. Short castling. So black finished its development, white's 3 pieces on the very strange positions. So white is going to lose at least 1 piece. After knight c7, white had to play already knight c3, but it's so difficult to say goodbye to the bishop on a6, so white is trying to sacrifice the knight, and after queen takes, play queen d3, escaping from the pin. But this is decisive blunder. Why? Why this move is decisive mistake? After queen a5 check, black is coming with a double attack. At the same time attacking the king on e1 and bishop on a6. After bishop d2 and queen takes a6, white resigned. Once again, the strategy with the moving the queen too early in the opening was completely demolished by black's not so difficult combination. Not so difficult combination, knight takes a6. And 2 more examples I would like to show you. d4, knight f6, c4, c5, d5, b5. And in that game, white even decided not to capture immediately, but to play e3. So black, of course, can capture the pawn on c4 or even to play b4, but I recommend you just for the start to play the classical way, so classical setup. Just continue developing your king side. The bishop should be posed toward the long diagonal, so black is also preparing the castling. So at the same time, white cannot wait anymore. White cannot play knight c3 because this could be made by b4 and knight has to go back. If white continues just simply playing knight f3, we also continue developing our bishop. Bishop g7, all according to plan. So c takes b5. White decided to capture. a6, and now white is just trying to protect this pawn with all its forces. Knight c3, bishop g7, bishop c4, d6, knight f3, knight bd7, short castling. And now we start feeling the problem with white's pieces. White pieces looks like developed quite great way, but after knight b6 we have to be scared where to move the bishop from c4. After bishop b3, better was to play bishop e2, of course, in this position, trying to keep the bishop on the diagonal a6 f1. After bishop b3, black is just simply play a takes b5, knight takes b5, and bring the bishop to the diagonal. Suddenly white cannot move the knight anymore. Knight c3 loses exchange. Also, white cannot move the bishop to c4 because black is just simply capturing the bishop, knight takes c4. White also cannot play a4 as we studied before because bishop takes b5 ruins white's position once again. a4 pawn is pinned. White is losing a piece. So we just played 11 moves and white's position almost lost. Can you imagine? White decided to play queen d3 and we are just increasing the pressure over the b5 knight by playing queen d7. And white just cannot survive anymore. Bishop c4, knight takes c4, and bishop takes b5. White is losing the full rook. With the next move, black is capturing, bishop takes f1. What else? In the game happened a4, but this move is of course losing after the standard and already well known for us, bishop takes b5. And doesn't matter here, white is capturing with the pawn, and then rook takes a1, or with the queen. So in that case we just trade in the queens first, and only then play rook takes a1. Game is over. Black is having rook up. So, but let's look at the position before white just blundered with bishop b3 and see that even after, let's say, white still playing something like bishop e2, short castling, it's extremely unpleasant position for white. So black with the next move going to capture the pawn on b5. Let's say white cannot move its queen to c2 because d5 pawn is hanging. In case of e4, I believe black is just continues the same strategy. Takes on b5 and just brings the bishop to a6. Getting ready for all black's pieces, looking and pressing the white's queen side. So if white is trying to bring the bishop somewhere to f4, so we just simply play knight d7. Next threat could be knight comes to c4, attacking this pawn on b2. If white is playing queen e2, black may use the idea queen a8, increasing attack over the a2 pawn, ready to bring the last piece in the game. Bishop is incredibly strong on g7. White hardly could create any counterplay. Of course, we just could think about the other alternatives. Let's say maybe to play immediately the move like queen a8. So now white even cannot think about e4, e5 anymore because d5 pawn is under attack. And only then to bring the knight to c4, attack the pawn on b2. Rook comes to b2 to b8, and same way, keeping quite unpleasant initiative on the queen side. Indeed, it was the best, of course, option for white. But as I said before, in the game, white played bishop b3 and black instantly reached a much better position. And the last game for today's session, after d4, knight f6, c4, c5, d5 and b5, c takes b5, a6, knight c3, a takes b5, knight takes b5. Black, instead of moving bishop a6, which we studied as the best continuation, moved immediately d6. Knight f3, and g6. Black decided just to keep the knight on b5. Anyway, knight has to go home at some moment, otherwise white cannot support the e2 and e4. The best strategy for white is very rapid development of its king side. That's why in such a position, most recommended way for white probably could be to play g3, then bishop comes to g2, then short castling. Instead, white is trying to develop pieces from the queen side, which is very serious mistake. Bishop g5. Because it weakens so much and makes the queen side completely unprotected. After bishop g7, white already paid attention that it's incredibly difficult to stop knight e4 move with additional bishop takes b2. At the same time, black is intending queen a5, force white's knight to go home to c3 and then once again to play knight e4. Indeed, bishop takes f6 still cannot be recommended. After bishop takes f6, black is getting two strong bishops, and once again queen a5 check is under serious threat. Queen c2, queen a5, so white is aiming the knight on b5 and intending after knight c3, which is the only move, to continue develop pieces. Bishop f5. Just now white realized that e4 move doesn't work anymore. Why? Black is sacrificing immediately. Bishop takes e4, queen takes e4, bishop takes c3, and white is going to lose. B takes c3, queen takes c3, and the rook on a1 is gone. At the same time, move like king d1, bishop takes b2. Black is just already having extra pawn and all advantages, and pawn on a2 is gone as well, and so strong bishop on b2. So white decided after bishop f5 to play queen b3, but after knight d7, e3, and rook b8, black is just reaching the additional target, the pawn on b2. White just has no moves. Queen a3, just queen takes a3 and bishop takes c3. Check, and the rook on a1 is gone. So, just completely destroying position, white's position. White cannot move the queen to c2 anymore. We have so great bishops looking towards the white's queen side. After queen d1, black has here white choice of winning continuation, but of course the simplest one is just getting rid the pawns on b2, and white just cannot stop bishop takes c3 or queen takes c3, winning immediately. So what we look from all these examples, that it's so dangerous position for white if white is not following the main principles in the opening stage, which we already studied for so many lectures. So white has to be extremely careful in the Benko Gambit. So black could develop the initiative in the opening. Black can go even for the endgames in many situations, having the pawn down. Black's pieces could become very, very dangerous in the middle game. So black is pressing with all his forces to white's queen side, and white's only counterplay in the center, e4 and e5. But how to reach this e5? So for black it's so easy to take control over the e5 square. And after black plays knight d7, and this happens in many situations, black's bishop on g7 becomes just killer. So white's queen side under so strong pressure. Black's powerful bishop on a6, black's powerful bishop on g7, just allowing to continue pressing white's position all the time. And let's say if the previous opening lines were working on mostly black or white were sacrificing material for the tactical dividends or rapid development. Here, black is sacrificing a pawn for the long-term advantages, better position of the pieces, more dynamic factors as open files on the queen side, strong center, good pawn chain, c5, d6, e7. So this completely new, I would say, approach to play with black in the gambit line. So that's why this Benko gambit becomes so important opening line, which, as I said before, was included in the repertoire almost by the all top players: Kasparov, Shirov, Peter Leko, Veselin Topalov. All were starting playing the Benko gambit because black is getting very good and very clear positional compensation, where white from the start of the game start to play only for defense and very hard to start any serious attack in the center or on the king side. So in the next lecture, I would like to go over the more modern ideas, so how white has to face the Benko gambit, how to trying to stop the black's activity on the queen side. So white's method of play in such a situation, and also, of course, I will show you more in deep the ideas how black playing today the Benko gambit. Thanks to everybody for watching me, and please follow my next lecture. If you have any question, you can contact me on www.chesslessons.wordpress.com and ask your question on my site. See you and bye.